Check, check. Hello, hello. Check. Sorry about that. Good evening. This is Goldie, also known as Mr. Anecdotal, Mr. Pasty, and the Talking Head. It's Wednesday, September 3rd, 2014. Remember, most importantly, I rant so you don't have to. If you want an inaccurate transcript of the show, send me an email to goldyrant@gmail.com. I want to apologize. I think Ustream has deleted all of my videos except the first one, which sucked. I'll figure out another method of putting them up somewhere. Any suggestions are appreciated. They're usually 30 to 50 minutes long, and tonight's will be longer, as I will need to give a little more background than usual. I want to talk about something brought to my attention by the Atlantic Monthly's September 2014 issue and the Texas Observer's August 2014 issue. The Texas Observer's article is Hard Lessons by John Savage. It's basically about the for-profit college-level schools, which in the U.S. comprise 13% of all students. He did an in-depth study of Everest Institute, which has medical assistant, electrical technician, and other courses, which are also taught more cheaply, much more cheaply at ACC, Austin Community College. The growth of for-profit colleges is based almost entirely on federal student aid, which grew from $4.6 billion in 2000 to $32 billion in 2010. According to the U.S. Department of Education, 72% of for-profit colleges produce graduates who on average earn less than high school dropouts. And while for-profit college students account for 13% of students in post-secondary education nationwide, they also account for nearly half of student defaults. While this article was specifically geared towards a criticism of a business that operates through a system of federal money, untapped federal money, this brings up a very specific issue regarding student loans, non-dischargeability of such debt in bankruptcy, and decision-making at the parental level regarding a student's choice to take on these huge amounts of debt. Let me read from the article. This is just a little tiny bit of history. Governmental policy aimed at democratizing access to college, first through the establishment of publicly funded state universities, and in 1944 with the GI Bill, has historically reflected the belief that higher education provides a path to the middle class. And it did, by the way. The GI Bill gave veterans grants to study at institutions of their choosing. As is the case with many federally sponsored social welfare programs, the GI Bill was quickly exploited. Fly-by-night for-profit colleges sprang up across the country to collect the funds trickling down from the bill. In 1972, the opportunity for exploitation increased when Congress granted for-profit colleges full eligibility to participate in federal student aid programs. Many schools developed a singular focus on obtaining this aid, even if it meant recruiting academically underqualified students with little chance of graduating and obtaining a career in their field of study. He's got a big long article about people incurring debt and not getting jobs. Farther on down, this is the author. During my first meeting with Everardo Garcia, he showed me the awards he received at Everest. 2 perfect attendance awards and 3 director's list awards. He proudly told me that making the director's list is like making the honor roll. Garcia did not pay money out of pocket to attend Everest, at least not initially. Qualified for a federal Pell Grant of more than $5,000 and federal loans totaling almost $15,000. Pell Grants are need-based assistance intended to help low-income students attend college. Garcia won't have to start repaying his loans until 6 months after he leaves Everest. By the way, that interest always accrues. According to company documents, program costs at Everest Austin average more than $18,000 per student, a number that includes tuition, fees, books, and supplies. That doesn't include housing. Median graduate debt is almost $13,000. Garcia will finish the dental assisting program this month. I asked him if he's worried about repaying the $15,000. Not at all, he said. They told me this is an investment in myself, and I'll be making a whole lot more money when I finish. So this is the for-profit colleges. Now let's go to the article, the Atlantic Monthly September 2014 article entitled Law School Scam by Paul Campos. In here, he's talking about several for-profit and nonprofit law schools, but he's talking specifically about, at the beginning, he's talking about Florida Coastal, which is accredited and is a for-profit law school. Florida Coastal is a for-profit law school, and in its presentation to its faculty, David Frank, the professor at Florida Coastal School of Law, had cataloged disturbing trends in the world of for-profit legal education. This world is one in which schools accredited by the American Bar Association admit large numbers of severely underqualified students. These students in turn take out hundreds of millions of dollars in loans annually, much of which they will never be able to repay. Eventually, federal taxpayers will be stuck with the tab, even as the schools themselves continue to reap enormous profits. There are only a small number of for-profit law schools nationwide, but a close look at them reveals that the perverse financial incentives under which they operate are merely extreme versions of those that afflict contemporary American higher education in general. That's the point. And these broader systemic dysfunctions have potentially devastating consequences for a vast number of young people and for higher education as a whole. Florida Coastal is one of 3 law schools owned by Infolaw System, a corporate entity created in 2004 by Sterling Partners, Chicago-based private equity firm. Infolaw purchased Florida Coastal in 2004 and then established Arizona Summit Law School, originally known as Phoenix School of Law, in 2005, and Charlotte School of Law in 2006. Okay, farther on down. None of this is to claim. So they're talking about how these schools build themselves by using the financial aid and how they are able to raise rates at will. None of this is to claim, this quote, none of this is to complain that greed and other selfish motivations are the only or even the principal drivers of the problematic trends in American higher education. Across the ideological spectrum, it is almost universally assumed that more and better education will function as a panacea for and underemployment, slow economic growth, and increasingly radical wealth disparities. Hence the broad support among liberal, moderate, and conservative politicians alike for the goal of constantly increasing the percentage of American population that goes to college. Behind that support seems to lurk an inchoate faith, one that is absurd when articulated clearly, which is why it almost never is, that higher education will eventually make everyone middle class. Yeah, like we have a middle class anymore to get to with college education. Back to the quotes. That faith helps explain many economic features of American higher education, such as the extraordinarily inefficient structure of federal loan programs, the non-dischargeable status of student debt, and the way in which rising college costs that have far outstripped inflation for decades are treated as a law of nature rather than a product of political choices, or lobbying, or Citizens United. This past April, the Congressional Budget Office projected that Americans will incur nearly $1.3 trillion in student debt over the next 11 years. That figure is in addition to the more than $1 trillion of such debt that remains outstanding today. It's not just young people. This is the inevitable consequence of an interwoven set of largely unchallenged assumptions. The idea that a college degree, and increasingly, thanks to rampant credential inflation, a graduate degree, should serve as a kind of minimum entrance requirement into the shrinking American middle class. The widespread belief that educational debt is always good debt. The related belief that the higher earnings of degreed workers are wholly caused by higher education, as opposed to being significantly correlated with it. The presumption that unlimited federal loan money should finance these beliefs, and the quiet acceptance of the reckless spending within the academy that all this money has entailed. These assumptions enabled Infolaw's lucrative foray into the world of for-profit education, but they have just as surely shaped the behavior of nonprofit colleges and universities. The result is a system that has produced an entire generation of over-credentialed, underemployed, and deeply indebted young people. Okay, so we have 2 examples that do not include the type of student who goes to the University of Texas and gets a journalism degree. This person incurs around $100,000 in debt. I've ranted before on the idiocy of incurring that kind of debt and having no ability to repay it, no plan. I certainly agree that a more educated population is necessary. I've argued that most of the common sense portion of that education should come from the parents. If parents are sending kids willy-nilly into debt for the rest of their lives, they are not doing good parenting. Let's look at the perverse, as they stated, incentives at work. For the nonprofit colleges, they need to retain their accreditation on a national level in order to qualify for federal student aid. Most of that is based on graduation rates. For the for-profits, like Everest, they have to show gainful employment among some small percentage of the graduates, as well as taking on lower income students. For the law schools, they have to maintain their accreditation, which is some minimal number of graduates passing the bar. If you will notice, there is no limitation on the claim costs of these universities to the students. So, if we were to talk about nonprofits, all of the money must go to the employees. You can keep raising the rates. There's no limitation. In other words, since the federal government is guaranteeing these loans and these loans are non-dischargeable in bankruptcy, there is no reason for a lender to not make these loans. Citibank, B of A. Why wouldn't you? You have no risk. No risk. That sounds so familiar. There's also no reason to not charge as much as you can, since the actual person repaying the loan is not the one handing the schools the money. The student's not handing the school the money. The federal government is, or Citibank is. Let's just call it the federal government, since Citibank isn't really making the loan. They would not make it if it were not guaranteed. And this is much like the main dislocation in healthcare, where I have no clue what the MRI costs, just that my plan covers it, leading to obviously higher costs for the MRI. Common sense. Parenting. It's the same with the cost of higher education. Obviously higher costs because the student does not care, and bad parenting by allowing your kid to do this without making an informed decision about the cost of repayment. Here's where it gets cool. If you compare this to the mortgage crisis, you see some interesting patterns emerge. They said patterns was okay. Whenever our comments, now, since they've deleted all of my videos, nobody has any idea what a commons is. Well, it's air, land, and water. And I include taxpayer money. These are things that require regulation. Without regulation, they'll be decimated. I'm not going to go through the whole example right now, but taxpayer money is a commons. Whenever you have taxpayer money in the hands of elected officials, and they need to run for re-election, following Citizens United and their progeny of cases that allow unlimited campaign funds to be donated to politicians, you will have an incredible system of bilking the taxpayer at the expense of the taxpayer. Whether it be inflated home and mortgage values or inflated costs at universities, for-profit colleges, and graduate schools. Now let's do the comparison. In the mortgage crisis, the borrowers were granted loans with no doc, I meant no document, no income verification. In this student loan crisis, the borrowers are granted loans with no docs and no income verification. In the mortgage crisis, there were inflated appraisals. In the student loan crisis, there's no appraisals. There's no appraisal done. The student is the home. How much is the student worth? In the mortgage crisis, the federal government ended up backing all of the loans. And this happened when they stared at the abyss in September 2008. They saw death and destruction, only avoidable by guaranteeing everything, as expected by Citibank and B of A. In the student loan crisis, the loans are already guaranteed or made directly by the federal government. We, the taxpayers. In the mortgage crisis, borrowers walked and could declare bankruptcy and discharge the deficiency. Now, when you borrow money to buy a house, you actually guarantee personally the difference between what the loan is, $200,000, let's say you borrow $200,000 for a $240,000 house, and when the lender comes in and forecloses, they foreclose and there's no buyers above 100,000. There is a $100,000 deficiency. You, the borrower, owe that $100,000. Now, whether or not the government came after you, or Citibank came after you, B of A came after you, or Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac came after you, that has nothing to do with whether or not you signed a document that said you owed it. So if the value went down of the house, you owed the 100,000. If they forgive it, it's income. If they don't forgive it, you can file for bankruptcy and get rid of it. Start anew, fresh start. That's what bankruptcy's purpose was. Okay? So that's what you could do in the mortgage crisis. In the student loan crisis, if you walk, you will eventually pay. You'll either pay the cash, or you'll pay in the form of not being able to buy a house, get insurance, rent a place, buy anything on credit, buy a car, credit. It is not dischargeable in bankruptcy. Now, this weird little thing that happened in 2005 and 2007 under the Bush administration, the Republicans, and the Democrats in Congress, was that they made student loans non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. What that means is if you file for bankruptcy, it would go away. Chapter 7. So your credit card debt goes away, your mortgage deficiency goes away, your student loan debt never goes away. What you owe the IRS never goes away. That's a very, very strict policy and dangerous policy. Now, this came about, if you think about it, we always look at where the incentives. Where are the incentives? The incentives were for Citi and B of A to be making student loans. And a way to prop up their supposed value would be to make them non-dischargeable. So they could sell them on the secondary market called Sallie Mae. These companies lobby legislators. When Citibank calls Cornyn, he picks up the phone. When I call Cornyn, he does not pick up the phone. That's why we need to overturn Citizens United. Corporations are not people entitled to free speech in the form of unlimited campaign contributions. But anyway, I'm just giving you the differences between mortgage debt being dischargeable and student loan debt not being dischargeable, which is based solely on donations to legislators. In the mortgage crisis, the total amount of the loan was based on some percentage of value, known as loan-to-value ratio. 80%, 70%, 90%, 95%. In the student loan crisis, there is no value or upper end of costs assigned. They're not saying, okay, you're going to borrow $100,000 to be a journalism major, and you're going to get a job at $25,000 a year, and your costs and expenses are $30,000. So no, we're not going to loan you $100,000. I'm not saying they have to do that, but they don't do that. You can just go to college. You can just go borrow as much as the school charges. So that story on the law school grads who cannot get a job and have $200,000 in debt, and stories of most college grads not being able to pay back their $100,000 in debt, they are true. And it is bad. Now, we've had a declining standard of living since 1974. And I used to never know what a standard of living was. But what it was my parents, my dad, was able to have one job. My mom could stay at home. We could go to college and go on vacation. He could own a home. And he could save for retirement. That's what an increasing standard of living is. It's where your spending power increases based on what you're making. In 1974, a lot of things happened. Women entered the workforce. Offshoring occurred. The middle class died in 1974. Unions died because they no longer had power. So the idea that A college education will bring you into the middle class. The middle class was a management job at a manufacturer. My dad sold carpet. He represented mills in the United States. That's gone. There is no middle class. There's only $10 an hour and rich people and rich support, elite support as I call it. It's 90% of the population. So 90% of the population is going to college and not getting a job that they can pay it back with. Now, that's just into the theory of entering the middle class by going to college. You do enter the middle class or the upper class by reading Shakespeare, learning music, reading English. The question is it worth $100,000 to go read this list of classics and get into a book club? Because you're not going to get into the middle class. It's gone. Died in 1974. It rose from 1812 to 1974. Oil shock as well. So it's only been kept up, this standard of living. We still think that we're doing better in appearance only by personal credit card debt. Appearance only. People are increasing their debt load with no hope of repaying it. So not only are we having these giant and increasing amounts of student loans, we are increasing the amount of our personal credit card debt. I'm not talking about that side. I'm just going to talk about the side that's guaranteed by the federal government. And it's just a cornucopia for the colleges. We can charge whatever we want. The law schools. We can charge whatever we want. The for-profit colleges like Everest and Phoenix, whatever. We can charge whatever we want because the buyer doesn't know the real cost. The buyer is the student. The real cost is paid by the lender. So the only possible way to stop the growth in costs, higher education, is to immediately abolish all future student loans. We let students finish out the year, but then no mas. My reasoning has to do with the inherent conflict in an open-ended system, an open-ended cost-paying system, such as this one. The only way to get to the real cost of the education that you require is for you to pay cash. And that's the only way that these people will actually compete. Similarly, you want to stop the growth in the cost of healthcare? You just stop the insurance. Make people shop. As soon as I started shopping for drugs that I need, as soon as I started shopping, all of a sudden Walgreens has a deal. CVS has a special guy deal. I ended up going over to whatever the place is on 38th Street, using cash. That's how you stop the problem. And when people are using cash or borrowing against their house or their retirement, they will help determine what the real cost is. Now, this comes along with a caveat, quite obviously. I have a friend of mine at the Y. His name is B. He's like, can't be done, blah, blah, blah. I hear you. That's not what this rant is for. This rant is to try and figure out a problem and try and come up with a solution. Now, the solution may not be doable, but we have to push the boundaries. If you're not living on the edge, you won't get cut. Just read that in the current Atlantic Monthly. Good ideas. So the caveat is we, the taxpayers, have already footed the bill for the huge number of delinquencies of student loans. Almost half are behind or delinquent. So that means the lenders have been paid. Students still owe the money. We have a giant underclass of journalism majors working at 7-Elevens for $10 an hour. And they have no hope of ever repaying the loans. And they have to repay them. They have to. It's debtor's prison, non-dischargeability and bankruptcy. That's what debtor's prison is. We need these people to be productive members of society. So we need to also forgive all student loans backed or made by the government. So we're going to stop all student loans, and then we're going to forgive all the debt that's been incurred. Because we already owe it. Doesn't matter. They're never going to pay it back. There's no chunk of middle-class journalism majors just like waiting to jump from $20,000 a year to $100,000. That's not there. It was similar to the healthcare. So even though my rants aren't up about that, I was hoping for the destruction of the health insurance system. So there would be rise from the phoenix as a government-sponsored program. A commons. Healthcare is a commons. I'm not going to talk about that right now. Destruction. Turns out it was not destroyed by Obamacare. And in fact, there's still a displacement. I pay my thing. I don't know how much the MRI still is. Here, we got to stop the loans. It's the only way you find out the real value. When they stopped making mortgages, they found out the real value of those properties. The real values of those properties. When the loans stopped. It's something we have to do. It's undoable, but it's pretty cool. And it is a solution after identifying the problem. Now, where is it? Sorry about that. Let's move on to privacy. After 9/11, the Bush administration started these little info sharing organizations called fusion centers. They were to be anti-terrorism intelligence sharing groups. Austin got one. It's called ARIC, Eric. Several years ago, I posed cameras at the intersection of East 12th Street and Chicon, a notorious drug and prostitution playground. I posed it for a few simple reasons, not the least of which was that they, the Austin Police Department, would not or could not tell us where the camera images of the children's bus stop at 12th and Chicon would go, what they would be used for, who could see them, how long they would be retained, and whether the simple act of moving in front of the camera on a public street would commence an insane series of events leading to a file for a school child who waits for the bus every day and shows up on the cameras every day. We'd heard about the fusion centers. We've all heard about Edward Snowden. All right. I'm going to read a couple of things to give just a tiny bit of background, and this was from the Statesman, June 13, 2014. U.S. tells local cops to stay quiet on surveillance. Citing security, feds intervene in public records cases. This is by Jack Gillum and Eileen Sullivan, Associated Press, from the Austin American Statesman. The Obama administration has been quietly advising local police not to disclose details about surveillance technology they are using to sweep up basic cell phone data from entire neighborhoods. Citing security reasons, the U.S. has intervened in routine state public records cases and criminal trials regarding use of the technology. This has resulted in police departments withholding materials or heavily censoring documents in rare instances when they disclose anything about the purchase and use of such powerful surveillance equipment. Federal involvement in local open records proceedings is unusual. Comes at a time when President Barack Obama said he welcomes a debate on government surveillance and called for more transparency about spying in the wake of disclosures about classified federal surveillance programs. There's more on it, but it'll be on the email. Now, from the Statesman, March 19, 2014. NSA records all calls in unnamed country. It's from the Associated Press. National Security Agency has been recording all of a foreign country's phone calls, then listening to the conversations up to a month later, the Washington Post reported Tuesday. At the request of U.S. officials, the Post said it would not identify the targeted country or other countries where the program's use was envisioned by officials. The program is the latest revelation from a trove of classified documents that former NSA systems analyst Edward Snowden leaked to certain news organizations last year. Most of those documents have described the U.S. collecting massive amounts of data and text. This program is different in that it records phone calls. There's more on that one, talking about the Mystic program. Now, let me read some things from the Austin Chronicle, August 28, 2014. under the news section, so there's not an author here. When I first read this, I cried a little, then I vomited, not just a little, in my mouth, and it actually came out of my mouth. So let me read some of this for you. It's fairly horrific. Quotes: I will send this over to Sergeant James Buhema from our Fusion Center. They are up to speed on groups like this, or they get up to speed very quick, wrote Austin Police Department Intelligence Unit Supervisor David Jarrell, since retired, in an email dated January 4th, 2012. Although the reference to groups like this and the intelligence unit might conjure up images of homegrown terrorists organizing an attack, Gerald's email instead referred to a rally organized by the political organization Move to Amend. According to its website, Move to Amend's mission is an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that states money is not a form of protected free speech under the First Amendment and can be regulated in political campaigns. I have to pause because I've said earlier today that we need to overturn Citizens United with a constitutional amendment to say corporations are not people entitled to unlimited free speech in the form of unlimited campaign contributions. So that's what I just said. So they listening to Ustream? Okay? You understand what I'm saying now? Mission creep. This is farther on down the article. Developed by the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11, fusion centers facilitate information sharing between federal and local law enforcement agencies. Though they were originally designed as a counterterrorism initiative, by the time ERIC was established in December 2010, many centers, including ERIC, were instead designated as taking an all crimes approach. Crimes approach. Activist groups have criticized the mission creep of fusion centers for perceived violations of civil liberties. Locally, the ERIC email reference to Move to Amend is a good example of those concerns. Moreover, the ERIC monitoring apparently extended to the group's individual members. In December 2011, Move to Amend organizer Michael Ryan contacted the U.S. Marshal Service to obtain a permit for a rally outside Austin's federal courthouse. The permit was granted and the rally took place without incident. However, during the permitting process, an email reflects the U.S. Marshal Service's Deputy Marshal Darren Sarton stating he is trying to get more information on Michael Ryan. Addressing a fellow Marshal Service deputy, he continued, "You might have better luck with your APD contact, though," apparently referring to Gerald. "If I learn anything else, I will let you know." Included was the group's website, misspelled. The email was forwarded to and received by Eric. Now we know these guys were all over Occupy Austin when they were hanging out on the steps of the city council. They had a list of 99 people. As a result of a lawsuit brought by two Occupy Austin participants, the banning process was ruled unconstitutional on its face by Federal District Judge Lee Eagle. This was banning people from staying there. The ruling confirms that the City of Austin and APD had essentially used ERIC as a tool to violate the Constitution. The lists contradict another ERIC claim. Sorry. During the last ERIC Privacy Policy Advisory Committee meeting in December of 2013, ERIC Operations Supervisor Sergeant James Buhema stated that we don't keep lists of people. Okay, so I read this. If you look at your email, you'll see I spoke at a Occupy Austin rally. It's on YouTube. It's got a date and a place. You know what I spoke about? Amending the Constitution for term limits, $100 maximum contributions. Corporations and other groups are not people. We will put gags on them as far as free speech goes. So when we heard about these fusion centers. And then we heard about cameras that were going to be going on, that were going to be put up. And we asked questions as citizens. Where are these images? Who's got them? Why are you looking at people that are not? There's no warrant. I'm so pissed Ustream deleted all this stuff, but that's okay. This is what the slippery slope is. They start an intelligence gathering enterprise to fight terrorism in quotation marks. And then they start files on citizens exercising their constitutional rights. This is why I said you cannot allow cameras. They go, everybody's got a camera. No, the government does not. They look inside my house. They listen to my phone calls. They're listening to this. They read my emails. Irrelevant whether or not I have anything to hide. If you use that argument, you're a fucking idiot. And I don't want to hear it. I have nothing to hide so they can search me. As I suspected, there are no guidelines because there cannot be. It is unconstitutional to troll, to try and find something. Can't troll in my emails. You can't troll in my phone calls. You can't troll through camera images throughout my neighborhood. Inside my house. Public streets, yes. This is not a public street. My email list is not a public street. My phone call is not a public street. If a judge wants to issue a warrant, that's fine. That's why I said you cannot allow these cameras. It leads to NSA listening to the calls, reading emails, turning on cameras on laptops without a warrant. That's why I have yellow sticky on here. I'm about to put it back on. I need to put something over the microphone as well. You should be disgusted. I'm going to do a citizens communication and I'm going to yell at the city council about this. It's really the city manager has control over the APD and as they're doing their contracts. Disgusting. I'm probably on the list. I had a friend of mine say you need to file a lawsuit. Do a Freedom of Information Act request. See if there's a file. Why do I have to do that? Because of bad parenting. Teach your children what privacy means and the limits of the federal government and the state government and the current government and the city government. That's all there is today. I want to thank the sponsors and I'm not going to list them. So thanks for coming out. Appreciate it. I'll try and find some of those old ones. We'll figure out a way to get those up. Have a good one.